Blackwater, 1911. John Marston, accompanied by FBI agents Ross and Fordham, is escorted onto a train to the town of Armadillo, forced by the government to hunt down his former gang members in exchange for him and his family's freedom. This premise is the basis of Red Dead Redemption's entire narrative. It's the Western that defined a generation, at least that's what the PlayStation flavor text says when I hover over the game. In all seriousness, Red Dead Redemption represents a bygone era. It's Rockstar's take on the revisionist Western, with some sprinkles of classic and spaghetti Westerns thrown in for good measure. Red Dead Redemption is a very important title for Rockstar in the grand scheme of everything, because it's not only amazing in its own right, but it acts as this middle ground between the older Rockstar approach to games compared to where they are now. Red Dead Redemption very clearly lays the groundwork for its sequel well in advance, while still existing on its own very well, even if it is a tad underwhelming to me at times. Despite Westerns not being as popular as they used to be in film, Red Dead as a series seemingly shatters that perception, as both titles were extremely popular and well received, with its sequel, Red Dead Redemption 2, holding the record for the biggest opening weekend in any entertainment form ever, generating $725 million in sale within the first 3 days of the game being out. But in order to get there, I thought it was only right to start with the first game. And I know I'm going to get some comments, people saying, oh, Red Dead Revolver was actually the first game. And they're right, Red Dead Revolver was the first game. But I didn't want to talk about Red Dead Revolver. I didn't play that game. If you want to hear about Red Dead Revolver, Noah Caldwell-Gervais has a very good video talking about the entire Red Dead series. But back to my original point. I've tried playing both Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 a few times, and they never really clicked for me. It wasn't until this most recent playthrough where I decided that I wanted to figure out what the hype was about and sit down and deal with the game on its own terms. At the time of writing, I have yet to revisit the sequel, and the last time I played that was years ago, but that'll be for a different video. I've never actually seen this game, Red Dead Redemption, through to the end, so it's less me revisiting the game and almost like a blind playthrough, in a way. Since this is more or less a blind playthrough, I didn't know what I was getting into, and I was very impressed with the game's pacing and how powerful the themes explored throughout the game are, and I want to talk about that. The train ride into Armadillo is an example of this. On the train, John Marston overhears a few conversations that sets up the setting and the time period of the game. The exposition feels natural, and it explains to the player that this is the dying days of the frontier. Civilization is catching up to the West. The day of the outlaw is over, and that's the basis for John's quest for redemption. The big corrupt government is forcing him to murder people so their hands can stay clean. We overhear stories about flying men and airplanes. We hear that the natives are being pushed even further out from their land because America now apparently belongs to the white Christian man instead of the apparent savage Native Americans. It's less that the times are changing and more like the change is already here, whether you're ready for it or not. That idea and more is explored throughout the rest of the game, and before I get started, I just wanted to issue the obvious spoiler warning. Even though the conclusion to John's story is one of the most talked about endings in gaming, I've had it spoiled, you've probably had it spoiled, I just didn't want to spoil it for somebody who somehow hasn't figured out what happens to John Marston. If you would like to see more, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, all that YouTube jazz. And if you want to support the channel, I do have a Patreon, more about that at the end. With that out of the way, let's get into it. This is a commentary and analysis of Red Dead Redemption. In the town of Armadillo, you meet Jake, your guide to where a former gang member by the name of Bill Williamson is held up. Don't worry about Jake, you'll never meet him again. Upon arriving at Fort Mercer, where Bill is held up, John didn't quite think any of this through, so he tells Bill to just come on out, as if it's a game of hide and seek where he's been caught and he's trying to rat everyone else out alongside him. But Bill really likes his hiding spot, so he shoots John and leaves him there to bleed out, until he's rescued by some ranchers. This is where the mechanical intro of the game starts. You're awoken at the ranch by one Bonnie McFarlane and decide to help out around the ranch in order to repay her for the $15 or so in medical costs from saving your life. I remember that discussion around the game has always talked about how slow the start of the game is and how the ranching portion of the game seemingly takes forever, but I don't really see that. The first few hours are split between doing ranch work and doing jobs for the marshal up in Armadillo. It's a nice split between rootin', tootin', and shootin'. Focusing on the ranching bit of the game for a moment, however, these are some of the most important blocks that the game lays out for the player. The natural exposition that comes from the banter between John and Bonnie is great. It's how we learn a bit more about John as a character, even if he is reluctant to let Bonnie know really anything that is going on. We still learn about John through his silence. The entire opening section on the ranch would not have worked if the two didn't have any chemistry, but the way they bounce off each other is something that Rockstar Games seems to do so effortlessly, it shouldn't have even been a worry in my mind. They have this flirtatious aura around each conversation, but gladly it doesn't go anywhere since John is married happily and has a son. It's the entire reason he's doing any of this. The deliberate slower pace of the opening compared to something like a Grand Theft Auto is what gives Red Dead as a series its charm. Both this game and its sequel are significantly slower paced than modern crime counterparts. It's like night and day at this point, and I think that's a partial reason to why I bounced off these games so hard as I did when I was younger. I'll focus more on that when I cover the sequel since it is significantly slower, but even here in the original, the mechanical feel of the game is very similar to Grand Theft Auto 4, but the narrative structuring is slower, and it can feel like you're just doing busy work at times. When ranching with Bonnie, you can see that clear as day. People talk about the ranch as if it goes on forever, and I think that's because it doesn't directly tie into your goal of capturing Bill. The entire purpose of the gameplay section is to help with that, obviously. It's getting John back on the saddle of outlaw work by easing him back into the basics that go with ranch work, and by proxy, it's roping in the player by giving you characterization to go along with and to learn the mechanics of the game and make it more enjoyable. And like I mentioned earlier, in between the ranch work, you have the ability to go into Armadillo and interact with some of the open world stuff. You can help with side missions, or you can gamble, or if you want, you can go do the Marshal's mission strings. Marshal work gives the player relief from strictly ranch work, and instead allows you to shoot some guys instead. If the ranch work plays out more like a classic Western with its slower pace and less emphasis on combat with more emphasis on character, the Marshal work, and by proxy the rest of the game, plays out more like a spaghetti Western. The spaghetti Western was an important part of the revitalization of the Western genre, as around the time of their inception, people had grown bored with the classic Hollywood Western, as a lot of them were safe and formulaic, kinda like how people talk about superhero movies now. They also played a large part in the creation of the revisionist Western as a whole subgenre of Western. These were Westerns that were more nuanced and gritty compared to classic Hollywood Westerns. They did away with basic good and evil and replaced it with anti-heroes and morally gray characters. Revisionist Westerns were often violent pictures, and Red Dead Redemption embraces that exaggerated violence of a spaghetti Western, and it adds a certain charm to the game that the sequel dropped for a little more realism. In this game, people flop over like in classic movies, while holding their chest as they dramatically fall down some stairs and they play a Wilhelm scream. They actually do play that a few times throughout the game. The first bandit camp you do with the Marshal actually shows this perfectly. On the ride over to the fort, we see one of the major ideas the characters all seem to agree on, and that is the idea that the government is overstepping their boundaries. This is the dying age of the frontier. Hell, the frontier is already dead, and the government is forcing itself onto these people, and many are opposed to it. It could be as simple as new laws being formed in the areas causing people to shift how they live, to the installation of railroads, or in extreme cases like John's, the government making them do dirty work and taking control of their lives. I'll come back around to the idea of government skepticism later on, but for now there's bandits to shoot, and this first bandit camp also acts as a gateway for me to talk about one of the more disappointing aspects of the game in my opinion, and funnily enough it's the gameplay at times. Throughout my entire time with the game, I would find myself periodically frustrated with the combat. This is an issue I have with a lot of Rockstar titles, but it seems like in Red Dead Redemption specifically, the cover system just didn't work when I wanted it to at times. If I dared to leave my spot, I would take a few shots because John just couldn't seem to figure out where he wanted to go. That, combined with the gunplay that's just kind of alright here, led to stuff like the various holdout sequences and turret sections feeling a little lackluster to me. The godsend of this game, however, is Deadeye. Deadeye essentially acts as this bullet time that allows you to quickly draw on an enemy, and you feel like Clint Eastwood in the Dollars trilogy. Deadeye is where the game feels most badass since you can take out as many targets as your gun holds ammo, so that would lead to times where I was taking out maybe a dozen guys with my repeater in one fell swoop. Is it overpowered? Probably, but I don't particularly mind since it plays into the power fantasy of being a badass gunslinger, and the game accounts for this since they will just throw dozens of guys at you at times. To me, Grand Theft Auto fixed the issue of the core gameplay feeling a bit mediocre by constantly having the dial turned up to 11 and throwing you in some crazy set pieces. Red Dead Redemption, on the other hand, uses Deadeye and the encompassing feeling of being a badass to more or less bypass the alright central gameplay. That's not to say the entire experience is mediocre, far from it. Much like GTA, the narrative is working overtime to keep you attached where the gameplay doesn't. Within this first act of Red Dead Redemption, the game likes to keep you entertained by showing you a whole bunch of new, quirky, wacky characters that help you attack Bill's fort at the climax of said first act. The characters you all meet are very odd characters that have what feel like an absurd amount of runtime dedicated to each of their shenanigans. The first of these characters is one Wes Nigel Dickens. He's a sleazy snake oil salesman that asks you to go around and help him sell people on literal snake oil. The term snake oil salesman seems like a term from a bygone era. The term nowadays is used to describe people you see on Twitter and TikTok who try and sell you some supplements or gummies that are scientifically proven to make your life better and are healthier than eating store-bought food for the low price of $60 a standard bottle size of pills. In reality, however, it was less than 200 years ago when people were selling literal snake oil that claimed to do the exact same thing. Of all the side characters you meet throughout, Wes Dickens has what feels like a large portion of runtime dedicated to wasting time with him. Sometimes you'll tag along with him and you'll help with his marketing scheme. Other times he'll have you do a race or two, and the entire time John is onto his scheme, Wes Dickens continues to play it up. And I couldn't help but feel like I was wasting time regardless of how good and how fun their banter is at times. The only reason John puts up with Wes Dickens' shit is because he's a networking guy. He knows some people that can help with the assault on Fort Mercer, but even then, I feel like too much time is spent with too little payoff for helping Wes Dickens and his shenanigans. But maybe that's the purpose. It's to reinforce the idea that John has no control over his life at this point. Whether it's the government tossing him around like a salad, or people he's asking for help constantly making him do something unrelated for the sake of progress, in big air quotes, towards the big goal, this idea will come up again throughout, especially once you get to Mexico. The next guy you meet is someone hunting for treasure. His name is Seth. I don't particularly like Seth, because he feels more in line with a character out of Grand Theft Auto Online, where his sole purpose is to be weird and off-putting on the phone. Of all the characters in Red Dead Redemption, he clashes with the very serious tone the most, acting as this sort of dark comedic relief, but it just didn't work for me. His hunt for treasure has him finding a glass eye, and I like how John cracks a smile when after all this time, the treasure that he was looking for was just somebody's glass eye that they were missing. But as a whole, Seth exists to let us in the fort. That's it. Seth just likes to ramble on and on and on, saying these weird, off-putting things. And again, that's his point, but again, it doesn't feel like it fits in Red Dead Redemption. At some points, I more or less just started tuning Seth out, because again, he feels like he provided nothing to the world or the experience other than just being the odd, funny character. And don't take this as me trying to be a cynic, somebody who's like, oh, look at this quirky millennial writing, I could write better than this. I'm not. That is not my expressed goal. My entire purpose of talking about Seth like this is because he frankly just annoys me. He's not bad enough to ruin the entire game. He's not poorly written. He's written exactly how he's supposed to be. I just don't like Seth as a character. Of all the characters you meet throughout the first act, the most important on the assault on the fort is a drunk named Irish. He's an arms dealer who keeps messing with us because he's drunk half the time and can't even remember who we are. He gives us a big Gatling gun in order to attack the fort, and he helps us cross over to Mexico when we need him. I find him the most enjoyable of the three. The worst part about our trio is that two of the three, Wes Dickens and Seth, feel out of place in a game like this. They feel more in line with what GTA has to offer and its constant sarcasm compared to Red Dead and what it wants you to believe it offers. I feel like I'm being a bit harsh on these characters, but the game just makes you spend so much time with them in this first act and listening to their incoherent ramblings that I can't help but wonder why slot them here. The rest of the game doesn't really have an issue like this. Everyone else is treated seriously while still getting time to be comedic and sarcastic and funny. So it just made me wonder why. Why does everyone get treated seriously except for these three? I get that they're supposed to be comedic relief, but they feel out of place even as comedic relief. They don't feel of the time, they feel like some LARPers you find in a GTA side quest or something like that. And perhaps I'm just looking at Red Dead Redemption the wrong way. Maybe that's why they're here, to try and ground you and realize this isn't some high and mighty story. But I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it's in the right spot to me. But either way, speaking of the assault on Fort Mercer, it happens, that's for sure. It's the first act climax, the big event that was being built up to the entire time, and I found it just fine. The entire time I couldn't help but feel a tad bit underwhelmed, since the big Gatling gun you spent so much time getting doesn't do much in order to make me feel like a badass. The train level in the game later on does a much better job at that. Here it feels more restrictive than anything. To me, the assault on Fort Mercer should have been this larger thing, but it just kind of felt like doing a bandit hideout, but even more on rails. Red Dead Redemption does such a good job on selling you on the world and the characters, even the ones I don't particularly like, that it's kind of baffling to me how mechanically the game is just alright. Nothing special. A weird middle ground between the over-exaggeration of Grand Theft Auto 4 and the more grounded feeling of Rockstar's modern titles. The entire assault lasts no more than 10 minutes, and you learn that Bill isn't even at the fort. He made his way down to Mexico to get help from an old associate, Javier Escuela. So, you go down to Mexico with the added goal of capturing Javier as well as Bill. At the end of the day, I can be reductive and I can complain about the first act's gameplay sequences all I want. I can complain about the characters I don't like, but I'd be lying if I said by the time I got to Mexico, I wasn't completely sold on the game. During each combat section, Bill Elm and Woody Jackson's score just completely consumes me, and it really does feel like I'm the man with no name. I'm Butch Cassidy or any gunslinger from any western that you like. The roaring themes throughout combat paired with the quiet tracks of the open world exploration gives Red Dead a vibe like no other. It's never too quiet in the game, but it's also quite easy for the score to just exist in the background while you pay no thought. The original score throughout is fantastic, but if you know me, I'm a sucker for a good-ass needle drop, and it just so happens that on the ride into Mexico, you experience possibly one of the best needle drops in any game. After a combat encounter while crossing the border, you split ways with Irish and move on into the Mexican sunset. The song Far Away by Jose Gonzalez starts playing. The song is great on its own, but paired with the scenery of the sunset and the charm that is the 7th gen console landscape, it creates this feeling within that just makes you audibly say, wow. If New Austin represents the future that has already arrived, civilization coming out west, Mexico, on the other hand, represents what came before, in a sense. It's quieter than the dying American frontier. It's freer in a way. The game doesn't really have to tell you this. You can grasp all that from the ride into Mexico. It also helps that the first thing you do in Mexico is shoot 3 guys who try and rob you for your boots, and then you meet another gunslinger by the name of Landon Ricketts. Ricketts is another outlaw that was rumored to be a part of the legendary Blackwater Massacre in 1899. We never see exactly what happened in Blackwater in any of the 2 games. It's an event that is a catalyst for the sequel, and it's brought up a few times in this game, so we can tell it was very important, but Rockstar makes the very deliberate choice never to show what happened in Blackwater. We get conflicting reports across both games of what actually happened, but it's never truly been confirmed. And I actually like that about these 2 games. The fact that the Blackwater Massacre is this mystery, it's something that stains the characters across both the games, but we never actually see, is an amazing little detail about this universe, and I'll touch on that more when I cover the second game. After the events at Blackwater, Ricketts fled to Mexico to live a more quiet life, and I feel like this represents the kind of life that John could have had. Not just in the way that he could flee anywhere at any time, but it's what happened if John had decided a bit sooner that the outlaw life in the States was not for him anymore. Maybe his family would also be in Mexico and they would live a happier life. John could grow old and crusty like Ricketts with his wife and actually watch their son Jack grow up. That's obviously not the life that he has, but I like to view Ricketts, at least in the state that we find him, as the scenario of what could have been, even if Ricketts isn't living the most upstanding life as is. But instead of growing old in Mexico, John gets involved with the civil war between the revolutionaries and the Mexican government. John approaches this in a similar manner to A Fistful of Dollars, or if you prefer Yojimbo, where he's playing both sides of the conflict in order to get what he wants. While John is playing both sides of the conflict, let's take a look at how Red Dead Redemption comes together as a whole and take a look at the wider gameplay. Mexico is the most open part of the game at this point. You're free to go back to the States whenever you want and do more side content, or you can do side content down in Mexico. You're free to hunt, gamble, play horseshoes, whatever you come across. It's when the entire gunslinger simulation comes together and you're let free from the on-rails nature of Act 1. That's not to say that Red Dead's open world isn't open to you early on, but once you get to Mexico, it really opens up to the player. However, I found that the world Red Dead Redemption gives you doesn't really inspire you to get lost in the side content the same way that other Rockstar titles do. The stranger missions in this game are fun and cute, but a little unmemorable. Getting involved in other people's affairs for 10 to 15 minute intervals is fun, but unlike something like a Yakuza sub-story, the variety offered by stranger missions in this game are a little lacking, with a lot of the climaxes either just being shoot a guy or find out something wacky about them. Again, they aren't bad, I just don't remember a lot of the sub-stories in this game. Unfortunately, you could say something similar about a lot of the open world activity here. It's all rather unremarkable. There's a lot on offer: blackjack, poker, horseshoes, racing, bandit camps, night patrols, an entire challenge menu, bounty hunting, treasure hunting, hunting in general, arm wrestling, knife rhythm game that I suck at, and more. That's just the thing. There is a lot of it, but there isn't a lot to it. These are fun distractions, but as they all exist, they're surface level. Fun distractions, but nothing to write home about. And I think that's because of the way they reward the player. Let's use hunting as an example. In Red Dead Redemption, you find an animal and you shoot it. There isn't anything to make you consider using a different weapon to preserve the animal, or there isn't even a challenge in hunting. A lot of the time you could just dead-eye the animal with a shotgun and then turn it in and get paid. Like everything else, it's fine, but you can feel as though something is missing, as if it's not as fleshed out as it should be. And as it exists in Red Dead Redemption, it's the easiest way to make quick money, but there isn't much to that activity. Hell, doing any of the side content really is an easy way to not only earn money, but it's how you unlock the different outfits throughout the game. Instead of having outfits be something you buy in the store, you do various challenges and side quests in order to unlock them. That leaves your primary reward, which is money, to be almost useless in the game because any weapon that you want to buy, you'll probably unlock at some point, and they're stupid expensive, so I never really found it worth it to buy a weapon early on. As a result of this system, you really only buy rental properties, horses, and ammo, but horses and rentals are expensive, and so is ammo. Everything's expensive in this game, so you kind of just buy ammo whenever you need it, and that's pretty much it. You might buy a house here or there, or maybe a new horse. There's not much to consider spending money on, and it doesn't help that money is not very abundant compared to other Rockstar games. This is more of a personal nitpick, but I really wish the outfits weren't hidden behind challenges, because another aspect of Rockstar titles that I like is just playing dress up with my character, for lack of a better term. I like putting my characters in absurd costumes or trying to make them match the scene. It's another factor of these games which Red Dead Redemption 1 seemingly skimped out on, and as a result of clothes being challenge work, you have one less thing to spend money on. Those factors, alongside the narrative heavily implying you to be on borrowed time, in a sense made me just not want to interact with the side content as a whole. And thankfully, you aren't required to. This isn't a checklist game, and it doesn't intrude the map like other open world titles. But the side content was by far the biggest disappointment to me, because in other open world titles, even by Rockstar, I usually look forward to the side content, so here, it being kind of lacking disappointed me in a way. More often than not, I found myself just wandering around the open world in between missions, taking in the scenery. I mentioned it towards the start of the section, but Red Dead Redemption truly is a beautiful game. I feel like I say that about a lot of games I cover here, but this game feels calm and uneasy anywhere you go. The soft breeze of the wind mixed with the score creates a landscape that feels like a painting wherever you go. This came out before the era of photo mode, so I wasn't stopping every 20 feet to take a photo like I would in other games, but I wish I could. Red Dead Redemption 2 takes the environments to the next level, and I'll talk about that more when I get to that game, but the more simplistic environments of this title lead to the vastness that surrounds you, and it makes you feel small in a way. Feeling small seems to be the intention of the game as a whole though, because as I've mentioned, the entire game feels like it's out of John's hands, and instead he is being dragged around by whoever, whether it be the American government or the Mexican government. The Mexican government especially is just pulling John around, since he's doing all this work for them in order to get information about Bill and Javier's whereabouts, but they constantly give him nothing but "you will learn in time." John does all this work for them in order to stop the rebels from overthrowing the government, but the second the government is done with him, John essentially is left for dead. As a part of its revisionist Western style, Red Dead Redemption does everything in its power to make sure that you know everyone involved in the conflict is kind of a jackass, some more than others. It's not that there isn't a side that's better than the other side, it's shown just how bad the Mexican government is, but once you meet up with the rebels and you meet Abraham Reyes, the leader of the rebels, the game shows you that he's no better as a leader compared to the Mexican government. The two head honchos in the Mexican government are Vincent de Santa, a captain in the army, and his superior, a Augustin Allende. I probably butchered both those names. Regardless, both men are comically evil in a traditional rock star fashion. Both only care about destroying the rebels and having sex as much as possible. Not with each other, but you get my point. The game makes it painfully obvious just how much they are using John without any intention of actually helping him accomplish his goals. This pattern of John just being used is obvious throughout the entire game. Everyone is just using John, but he seems to not be able to see it for the life of him. Or maybe he does, and there just isn't much he can do, and he knows that. Either way, shit takes a turn for the worse when John helps the rebels and the Mexican government finds out and just straight up plans to kill John. He's rescued by said rebels, and then you're sent to kill DeSanta and Allende alongside capturing or killing Bill and Javier. But in working with the rebels, we see how their leader, Abraham Reyes, is no better than DeSanta and Allende in a lot of ways. Where the prior two already had the power get to their head and give them the impression that they could do what they wanted, something we see whenever we start a mission and they're just abusing and harassing women, Reyes is framing himself as this revolutionary leader, and that impression of himself, that power, is getting to him, and we see that he's really just doing it for sex and power. Same thing as DeSanta and Allende. At one point when you're talking with Reyes, he even says, quote, "I owe it to the future of Mexico to breed, my brother. If I can get noble blood flowing through the veins of peasants, can you imagine how great this country could be? An army of Reyes, of kings," end quote. He's really no better than the people he's trying to dethrone. We can see this especially in his relationship, if you want to call it that, with a girl named Luisa. Luisa is a woman living in the moment. She realizes the history she is currently a part of, and she wants to do everything to see a better future for Mexico. She genuinely believes that Reyes is the way for the future, the way for the people, and she believes that she will be married to him at some point, despite Reyes constantly calling her Laura, and he only uses her for sex. He doesn't care about her. The game even tells you just how bad Reyes is for the country, because in the epilogue for the game, Reyes has become a tyrannical dictator. As a dictator, he ordered soldiers to execute peaceful protesters in a small village just south of the capital. Much like a lot of the game, the cycle of violence continues even under new Mexican leadership. Despite all that, however, the Mexican portion of this game is a bit forgettable to me in hindsight. Nothing about it is bad, but because you do so much back and forth for the rebels and the government, it all kind of just mushes together until the climax of Mexico. The ride into Mexico is iconic, but everything after the fact, like I mentioned, is a little forgettable. Even when writing this, I was at a loss at times because despite spending a decent chunk of the game in Mexico, I don't really remember a lot of what happens, especially because a lot of the story is contained to the Mexican region, and once you leave it, it doesn't really have a wider effect on the narrative. But also, like I mentioned, that doesn't make it bad, not at all. It's very good. I have no clue why, but I'm reminded of the really bad 2005 remake of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory when I talk about Mexico. A movie I've only rewatched since I was a child, not for this video or anything, but because a friend watched all the Willy Wonka movies for God knows what reason, and I was reminded about how that movie had a subplot where Willy Wonka's father, played by Christopher Lee, was a dentist who wouldn't allow Willy Wonka to do anything with chocolate because it's candy and that's bad for your teeth. So Willy Wonka ran away to become a chocolatier. I have no clue why I'm reminded of that bad subplot from a shitty movie, but the thought came to me when leaving Mexico for like a split second. What made it odd to me is that the Mexican plot of Red Dead Redemption isn't bad or a waste of time. It's just a little forgettable, but the characters and everything about it is fun. The set pieces are fun, even if 3/4 of the main cast are just evil. If anything, it feels more like a Seinfeld-Kramer subplot. Does any of that have any wider effect on the game or my perception of it? No, but the second that thought popped into my head, I could not shake the feeling of Mexico feeling like a B-plot that has a little too much time spent on it. Especially since, as I mentioned, once you capture who you're looking for, you go back to America and John just expects to be a free man. You're acting like as if nothing happened, but then you're told you have to go catch your old leader, Dutch. Again, they're taking control of his life away from John and making him do the dirty work that he wasn't even told he had to do. But reuniting with Dutch will probably be the least of John's worries in the coming hours. Little editor's note for part 3, do the little title card maybe, I don't know. Just put something here and then delete this audio. The build-up to meeting Dutch is very tense because you can tell Dutch is a very dangerous man. He is very charismatic. He knows how to talk his way out of any situation, and he knows what to say. Benjamin Byron Davis does such an incredible job playing Dutch because he gives the character a vocal presence unlike anyone else. Everyone kind of has a similar-ish sounding voice. I read it as modernization coming on every level and changing even how people talk, making people talk a little more proper and whatnot. Obviously, that's not the entire case. There's people with southern draws, there's Mexican accents, but everyone kind of sounds similar in a way. That is, except for John and Dutch. John has a very scratchy voice that's impossible to miss. He feels like a Western gunslinger and the protagonist of a story. Dutch, on the other hand, has this loud, booming voice. Sometimes it's also soft and comforting in a way. He feels like a natural-born leader, so it's no surprise that he's taken some rogue Native Americans and made it an impromptu gang since they both have a shared hatred of American modernization. The first meeting with Dutch proper happens with a bank robbery where we catch him and he's taken a hostage. He's trying to weasel his way out again by talking with John. He starts asking John how's life, how's his family, but eventually he finds a way to slip out of the room by shooting the hostage in the head and runs. I'll come back to Dutch here in a bit, but for a moment I would like to talk about our FBI buddies. Agent Ross is obviously playing John like a fiddle, and it plays into this whole idea of government skepticism I've mentioned throughout. Much like the characters we met down in Mexico, Ross is a man who holds too much power for his own good, and now that's gone to his head. A few missions before you actually meet Dutch, John has a conversation with Ross, and it's clear that John is done with the government and their whole shtick of, well, actually, I got one more thing for you, but then you'll be free. We all know that they're not going to give him his freedom, but the constant promise is enough for John to keep going, even if it is something that will never come, and even a part of him knows that. When traveling in a car with Agent Ross and Agent Fordham, the other agent, we get to see into the mind of Ross and what the power makes him think of himself. He says things like, you can't erase the past, but we can. And when John says at one point, you're not God, Ross replies, in your case, Mr. Marston, I am. I actually really like this car ride because it's one of the only times you ride in an actual car, and the entire conversation in that car ride exists to displace John Marston. Throughout the game, we hear about technological advancements, and in the car ride, we see technological advancements. John gets handed a semi-automatic handgun. John is clearly out of his depth. He doesn't care about cars and technology for the most part. That's all past him. He exists as a relic of the past, while Ross is a vessel for the future to arrive to the Old West. The FBI agents, mainly Ross, exist as an immediate threat to John. They're always present and they control everything. Dutch, on the other hand, is a looming threat. Very rarely is he actually present on screen, and instead we hear about him for most of the game. As I mentioned earlier, he's very charismatic and a natural-born leader, and that's what makes him dangerous, but he also exists as a shadow over John, a constant reminder of his past life, and it's something we see in the prequel, Red Dead Redemption 2, but even here, without the context of that prequel, we can tell things are different now. Hell, Dutch even tells you that times are different, and John agrees with him, but where Dutch is purposely trying to hold on to that violent outlaw life, John just wants to settle down, or at least that's what he's telling himself. John's journey of violence throughout the game, to me, represents that John still enjoys the outlaw lifestyle. He's always quick to draw his weapon, he won't hesitate to hurt a man if he needs answers, or even if they inconvenience him. No matter how much ranch work he does, we can see that the outlaw in John will never go away. It's the only life that he's ever really known. And that's the point of this game. Redemption is not something John just earns. He can't just redeem himself by killing his gang members, but what he is doing is redeeming his lifestyle in a way by eliminating everything that came before. He's wiping away his past, but in wiping away his past, there's some other things he'll have to wipe away too. But that's for future John to deal with. In the moment, you find out where Dutch is hiding, and Ross has you lead this big charge on Dutch's fort for one final confrontation, and the entire set piece is big and extravagant. It's this big, explosive climax, but by the time you reach Dutch, all of that fades away. The machine guns and the fire is no more. This isn't a badass final boss showdown where you just lay bullets into Dutch. It's John and Dutch. Dutch is broken. He's realizing that he's lost. He's clearly just gone insane. Or maybe he just knows his time is over. A running theme throughout the entire game. Everyone has lost family. Everyone has lost in general. The idea of the West is done. No more outlaws. Marston sticks out by having his family still and working with the government for said family. And even Dutch knows that. His death isn't noble, loud, or even all that impressive, but what it is Dutch taking fate into his own hands. At one point, he says to you, quote, "We can't fight anything, but all I do is fight," end quote. This represents a struggle of the game as a whole. By holding on to the dying frontier as civilization comes, regardless if they're ready or not, they are just being exterminated one by one. John doesn't even kill Dutch here. Instead of being shot and killed, where we get a badass hero shot of John and a title card and it rolls credits, Dutch jumps. Dutch isn't in the game for very long, all things considered, but he takes up such a presence on the screen that he feels like a larger part of the experience than he really is. With Dutch dead, all that means for John is that he's finally a free man, so he rides off into the sun and goes back to his family. The game comes full circle in a way. You started off doing ranch work with Bonnie, and now you're back home. This time you're doing ranch work with your son Jack and Abigail, your wife. This little end section of the game is cute. It not only has nice character building throughout, but it also gives the player a little bit of hope. You think, even for a split second, that John actually won and earned his freedom. But the game continuing past John returning home is all but confirmation of what's going to happen. Remember, this is a revisionist Western, it's obvious. Even if it wasn't one of the most talked about twists in gaming, I still think that if you play it blind, it's very obvious what's going to happen to John Marston. But again, there's that sliver of hope for John, because John loves his family. He loves Abigail. Even though we see Bonnie McFarlane did have feelings for John, he didn't even fall to temptation or anything like that because he loves his wife so much. John is trying to be the best father he can to Jack, and he's not always doing the best job because he hasn't been around for a while, but he's trying, and that's what matters. That's what gives you the hope. John makes these promises that he won't go away again, and he's finally a free man. He'll stay with his family, and every time he makes a promise like that to Jack, it cements his fate. You do all this ranch work for about 3 hours, so it makes the stinger hit that much harder. All the ranch work culminates in a cutscene when you're talking to Jack in the barn about the future, how the ranch could turn around and become one of the best ranches in the state. It's hopefully optimistic, and Jack is talking to you about the advancing world around you. At one point, Jack asks if there's anything John doesn't like shooting, and John replies, quote, "Well, I ain't met the thing yet, but as soon as I do, I'll let you know. You can even put it in one of those books you read." And off the top of his head, Jack comes up with the title, "The Day John Marston Stopped Shooting." John says, quote, "Nobody would read that. People like shooting," which is a cute little wink to the camera moment, but the whole nice scene is interrupted by Uncle. People are coming en masse to the ranch on horseback. It's the army, or at least a subset of the army, and they're coming for John. You're the one last holdout of the Old West. Even though I knew this was coming from years of people talking about this game, and because the game just spells it out for you from the start, I was dreading this moment. John is such a likable character that this fate is no way for a protagonist to go, but it's the reality of a revisionist Western like this. As a part of being a revisionist Western, there's not always a happy ending for our character. I'm partially reminded of No Country for Old Men, and how in that movie, our main character, played by Josh Brolin, is kind of just killed off screen, unceremoniously dispatched. We only know he was caught in the crossfire when we follow Tommy Lee Jones's character and we see him laying dead in the door frame. At the end of that movie, evil runs free. Anton Chigurh isn't put behind bars. He isn't killed. He's in a car accident, but he just kind of runs away. He still roams free. The day John Marston stopped shooting has come sooner than anyone would have thought. He knows his time is up, just like Dutch told him on the cliff. So he sends Jack and Abigail on horseback away from the ranch. Once they're gone, John looks outside the barn door and sees all the army men waiting for him. There's too many, even for John, but he comes to terms with his fate and opens the barn doors. Deadeye activates, and you can tag as many people as your gun can hold ammo, but there just isn't enough ammo or time to kill them all. You can kill a few people, but John ultimately gets filled with bullets. Ross just lights a cigar as you fall down in your last moments of life. The image of John Marston standing there, riddled with bullets, is such a powerful image. Again, even though I knew this was coming from years of spoilers, I've seen the cutscene a billion times before playing the game, I still got a little glassy-eyed watching the scene. All control is taken away from the player, and you don't get to win, even with your video game magic win button known as Deadeye, and then you get to relish in that defeat by watching John stand there and die in a cutscene, away from player control. Jack and Abigail return to the bar and see John laying there dead, and we get another time skip. It's a few years later. We're now Jack Marston, standing at John and Abigail's grave. She died off screen from what I assume are just natural causes, maybe a broken heart if you're George Lucas, but either way, you play as Jack now. He exists mainly as a world state for the player to continue any side quests and just continue playing the game if they want. If you're in the middle of a side quest, you get to finish it, and it's very funny that they wait 3 years for Jack to come by and finish the job John started. Alongside being a world state for the player to generally continue playing the game, he also has has a little bit of an epilogue. One mission, to be exact. Jack goes around trying to find Agent Ross, and after searching in a few places, he finds him, enjoying life since he's retired, and you let him know who you are and that you intend to kill him. You do exactly that. You gun him down right there. I have an issue with this epilogue, that issue being that I simply don't like that you get to kill Ross as Jack, because when you kill Ross as Jack, you get this badass title card and then musical cue and then it cuts to credits. But because Jack was filled with all this vengeance and rage, he is perpetuating the cycle of violence that got John in this mess to begin with. John redeemed himself when he chose to sacrifice himself, when he chose to walk out into that group of army men and was killed. Giving the player the ability to kill a retired Agent Ross doesn't do anything but almost diminish John's death in a way, because it shows us that Jack didn't listen to his father, who died protecting him. John didn't want Jack to live the same kind of life he did, so killing Ross put Jack on the wrong path that he was already falling down as a teenager. We saw this in some of the ranching missions where Jack wasn't listening to John. A part of me feels like this was done because it's a game and people expected us to be able to kill Ross or something, and if that's the case, I don't particularly like this scene. You get a badass title card and credits like I mentioned. It's shown as a reward to the player, but honestly, I feel like that wasn't the intended read of the scene. I think it's supposed to be a bad thing. Like I mentioned, he's living a life that John didn't want for him, and killing Ross doesn't bring any joy to his life. Maybe in the moment he'll think he redeemed his father, but he didn't actually redeem him. Honestly, I feel kind of bad because Jack has ruined what life he could have made for himself to instead kill this man. Back in the ranching missions, we saw that Jack had all these dreams and aspirations to maybe become a big city man one day, but instead he's here killing Ross. I understand why we play as Jack and continue playing the game after John's death. It's an open world Rockstar game after all, but the proper end to the story doesn't feel satisfying to me. It's a small gripe that doesn't affect how I feel about the game in the slightest, which is odd. You would think that if I didn't like the epilogue to the game, it would sour the entire experience, but I think Red Dead Redemption has such a strong core experience that even if you're like me and didn't find the epilogue all that satisfying, it's short enough to not warrant disliking the entire experience. Red Dead Redemption is fantastic from start to almost finish. I wasn't the most familiar with Westerns before playing this game, and I did my homework, but of all the Westerns that I've experienced at this point, which admittedly still isn't a lot, Red Dead Redemption sticks out because it combines a lot of what I liked from each era of the Western. It's a story about redemption in the face of certain death, and as a revisionist Western, we follow a protagonist that isn't the best person, but he's trying to make a change, even if it's too late. Mechanically, it feels like a spaghetti Western with loud guns that make people dramatically flop over when they're killed, and this may be a specific example, but the digital frontier in this game feels straight out of a John Ford classic Western. Everything comes together to make an experience that I'm surprised I didn't play through sooner. It leaves me excited to play the sequel for the first time since I was 13, and to play through it again, basically blind. I know the big twists of the story, but everything else is going to be fresh in my mind. The only issue that I have with Red Dead Redemption are the epilogue and what comes next. Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare was released roughly 6 months after the release of the base game. It's a cute little expansion that takes place in an alternate timeline where a zombie plague takes over New Austin. It opens on a dark and stormy night in the Marston household. We see Jack reading a book and Abigail knitting. John returns after a long day's work and everyone decides to go to bed despite Uncle still being out and about. They are awoken in the middle of the night by Uncle, who is now a zombie, and Abigail and Jack end up bitten by Uncle, who John kills. Uncle was in the base game a little bit, but Uncle's not really important in either of these stories. John ties up Abigail and Jack and sets out on a way to figure out how to cure them. He heads into the town of Blackwater to see a doctor, only to find that the town has been overrun by whatever's going on, and now it's up to you to get to the bottom of it. It's a schlocky B-horror movie spin, and if it were just this intro bit, I would absolutely adore this expansion. The first hour or so is a lot of fun as you see all the problems and all these people losing their minds over the zombie apocalypse, but issues arise fast with this expansion, and that issue is that it's spread really thin. All in all, I think it takes somewhere between 5 and 7 hours to beat the expansion, even if you're zooming through the main story, because it makes you do almost everything. The side quests that populate the map aren't side quests. They're main quests, pretending to be little stranger events, and all of them are pretty repetitive even by Rockstar standards, but before I start complaining, let me establish a groundwork. Undead Nightmare essentially acts as this best of in a way. We get to see what Bonnie McFarlane, Wes Dickens, Seth, and some others are up to in this dire time, and for the most part, they have little cute quests, but they don't have any real substance to them. Once you've done one of their quests, you've pretty much done every quest. John, I need you to go to this other part of the map, pick something up for me, and come back. That's the basis of every quest in Undead Nightmare, with little variation between each. The cute character moments don't make up for the tedium I felt doing the quest because there simply isn't enough narratively or mechanically to make up for the runtime. I understand that it sounds like I'm being reductive about these quests, but really, that's all there is to it. The only quests with some real substance are the actual main narrative quests, which, even then, they're pretty bog standard. The only unique quest that I can really think of is the Sasquatch quest, where you go and hunt Sasquatches because you heard they were eating babies up in the mountain, and you kill all but one. And you talk to the last Sasquatch, and he says that it was completely dumbfounded. They don't eat babies, they eat like berries and shit. So you accidentally leave one Sasquatch alive, dooming the species. You get the option to shoot him or to leave him, but it's a really cute quest. It's the highlight moment of Undead Nightmare for a lot of people, and rightfully so. It's a very funny quest. But after that, you're just doing the aforementioned John collect my shit quests and base defense missions. Throughout Undead Nightmare, various towns from the base game are now marked as places of interest, and whenever you go to them, you can help defend the town. These little events involve killing a few waves of zombies, and then you get the city as a safe spot. After a while, however, zombies will start to overrun the city, and you have to go back and defend it. It's an endless loop of gameplay. There's a few safe spots that don't go away regardless, so you don't lose everything, but if you don't defend these safe zones, they will eventually fall to the zombies and be unsalvageable. That's the brunt of the content for this expansion. There's some other repeatable activities that I didn't mention, but for the most part, it's a handful of missions and town defense. Don't take this as me saying the expansion is bad or a scam. It was just a bit frustrating playing through the expansion and how it lasts so long, considering how little there is to actually do. It felt like it was stretching itself a bit thin, like I said. Undead Nightmare is considered one of the best expansions of all time, and that set my expectations high, maybe higher than they should have been, but looking back at my notes for the whole experience, they're sparse compared to the base game, where I couldn't go more than a few minutes without writing something down. Killing zombies feels fine, good even, but what I really like about the expansion is the fact that it changes up the gameplay quite a bit for combat. Instead of hiding behind cover the entire time, you run around and train zombies and mow them down as fast as you can with your Deadeye. It's a lot of fun. But my favorite bit of the expansion was when you were able to stop playing and continue the schlocky B-horror narrative stuff. That's when I was having the most fun, but again, that's also relatively sparse. So I spent a lot of my time on my apocalyptic horse, which thankfully had unlimited stamina to make the venture across the map a bit faster. But what really broke the expansion for me towards the end was when I had to stop any story progress and go out of my way to grind. Perhaps this was completely self-inflicted, I don't know, but at one point, Landon Ricketts, he asked you for some dynamite to make some zombie bait. I found the bait no problem, but I could not find the dynamite for the life of me, and the only way to get dynamite was to grind out the safe zones. I spent over an hour grinding out safe zones to find some dynamite, and again, maybe that's my fault, but it just frustrated me because I wanted to continue the fun part of the expansion, but here I was, looking for fucking dynamite. Towards the end of the expansion, we learned that Abraham Reyes, the man we helped take control of the region from the base game, is responsible for the outbreak. We learned that Reyes triggered the zombie plague when he stole an Aztec mask from the tombs and became a zombie himself. That's cheesy zombie schlock, and I love that. So, we return the mask, and everything is back to normal, until we see Seth, the grave robber you help in both campaigns, broke into the tomb again and stole the mask in search for his treasure that he's always looking for. So John, who is dead at this point, rises from the grave because he was buried with holy water or something, and then you get to continue playing the expansion. Giving you a world state with Zombie John is pretty cool, like you can continue to play the expansion after the fact, but I didn't really see much of a purpose in doing it since at that point it's just the repeatable activities on the map, but it's the thought that counts. As a whole, Undead Nightmare wasn't the strongest way to end off Red Dead Redemption in my eyes, as you can probably tell because I didn't have much to say about it, especially following the epilogue to the base game that I also didn't really like, but that's me being a bit hyperbolic. Red Dead Redemption and Undead Nightmare are still both great experiences. The base game is one of the best written westerns I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and despite my issues with the game, no one element, or even the elements I don't like added up, is enough to make me dislike the game. Undead Nightmare, despite how I find it boring at times, is exceptionally funny and snappy when it chooses to be. The zombie combat is fun, if not a little repetitive, and the quests are cute, if not also a bit repetitive. Now, having played the game, I finally understand why people adore this game. It's not my favorite Rockstar outing, but it existed as this pleasant surprise because I wasn't expecting the game to hook me as fast as it did and as hard as it did. But now that it's behind me, I'm interested in revisiting Red Dead Redemption 2 to see how that holds up for me, since, like I mentioned earlier, I have not played that game since I was 13. But now that just seems so far away. If you made it to this far in the video, I would just like to say a few things. First off, thank you to anyone who made it this far in the video. I would also like to say thanks specifically to people like Pogo Shack who make these videos possible by backing me on the crowdfunding website Patreon. As a free member, you get access to a watch list of movies I prepare for each video, and as a paid member, for $5 or $10 a month, you get ad-free videos, behind-the-scenes exclusive content, future polls, and in the coming months, exclusive film commentaries for one or two of the watch list films for that month. It's still something that I'm working the logistics of, but the first one should be out within the next few related videos. I'm not sure exactly which one it'll be for, but it'll be out at least one by the end of the year. And I'll release one on the free channel, or on the second channel for free, and then from that point on, I'll just release the rest on Patreon. But that's all I really have to say for now. No big updates for the next video. Yeah. Other than that, I will see you in the next one. Later.